Bonjour à tous. Hi, everyone. And welcome everyone to our virtual conference presented by AFI on this topic, avoid these pitfalls when exporting, importing to the US. In this presentation, you will get all the latest on issues FDA is finding when inspecting manufacturers and importers of food. Bob will help you to understand what you need to do to avoid these and other issues that could impact your company's bottom line. Few words on Bob Bauer. He is the president of the Association of Food Industries, the largest importers association in the US. With 20 years and more of career in this field, Bob provides background on the types of requirements being imposed and how they would change relationships among all parties in the food supply chain. Bob and his association are there to advise everyone on managing the conflicts between the regulatory and commercial realities. That is why we work with AFI and Bob for more than 10 years, and he has helped us to develop our hosted bio program since day one. He has also naturally become our FDA compliance expert since we started the Expert Hub in 2015. Bob, I leave you the floor now.
Okay, thank you, Xavier. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you, albeit virtually, but it is what it is. It's 2020, and we're doing things a little bit differently this time around. So just a quick introduction, as Xavier said, we're the Food Import Industries Trade Association for the United States. So we have 1,000+ companies around the world that are members, either in the United States doing the importing or somewhere else shipping product to the United States. We've been around since 1906, myself not quite that long, but you know, we've been there and we'll continue to be there. And one of the major focuses these days, and has been now for many years, is the Food Safety Modernization Act. And I'm going to do the presentation centered around that because I'll hit the pitfalls and the problems people are experiencing, and it's all going to be related to FSMA. And FSMA, by the way, is very similar to the new Canadian food law. In fact, sometimes I refer to it as FSMA North, which you folks have. And FSMA was not the brainchild just in the United States, too. It builds off of what was being done in other countries and the like. So if you're able to take what we talked about today and apply it, you may need to tweak a little bit here and there to comply in a particular country, but you'll be well on the road to being able to ship food anywhere. Now, I highlighted 2 of the 7 major rules that are involved with FSMA. What happens when a law gets passed, sometimes they'll break it down into sections, and here that's what they did. Preventive control rule for human food. So for those of you producing food, whether you're based in the United States or anywhere else, you are subject to, if you're going to ship any of that product to the United States, you're subject to the preventive control for human food rule. And then if I'm here in the United States and I'm buying from you, the Foreign Supplier Verification Program rule applies to me. And through that rule, I need to verify that you are producing food that meets US food safety regulations. And that's a lot of what I'm going to speak about today will be centered around that and where people are falling short. Preventive control rules is, that's the human food rule. And I love this graphic. I took it right from FDA. In case you're having a little trouble seeing it, hazard analysis is where everything starts. So you're producing a product, you have to identify any potential hazards associated with that product. And then you put preventive control measures in place to mitigate or eliminate those hazards. Some hazards can't ever be fully eliminated, so you mitigate them, you make them happen as infrequently as possible. Monitoring procedures, so you're monitoring the preventive controls are being carried out and that sort of thing. You have corrective actions in place. Again, for something where you can never fully eliminate the potential for a hazard to develop, you already have these in place. Sometimes you have to add new ones if something happens. So corrective actions are another one. Verification, some people put a / validation next to it. You're just verifying that everything ahead of this is being done and that it's effective. You don't want to be doing preventive control or monitoring, a test, find out the results aren't any good and then not act on them. So the verification is, okay, not only are we doing the tests and you saw a need to fix something or what have you. So it's on an ongoing basis that you're doing this. And then record keeping is the final one. If it's not written down, it didn't happen. That the record keeping is where we thought all along people would have the most trouble, quite frankly. A lot of the other things are being done, but they may not be documenting it quite as much or as detailed as they need to be. And that is coming to fruition. It is what's happening. But for the most part, even the stuff I'm going to talk about when I talk about the deficiencies that are being found, for the most part, the industry is doing a pretty good job. Now, I love the fact that this graphic is in a circle, and that's why I use it all the time, because it's easy. If I was to cover up, for example, monitoring procedures, the circle would be broken and your plan would not be effective. It would not be sufficient at all. So that's why I love the fact that it's in a circle. Now, I have a lot more slides than I really have time to go into detail on, but I like the information that's on these slides. So I'm not going to belabor on some of them a whole lot, but the hazard analysis is key. All right, and in my mind, everything in FSMA centers around the human food rule. In the human food rule, everything centers around the hazard analysis because you can't know that you are producing safe food without having identified the potential hazards. Okay, and what you're looking for is something that's known or reasonably foreseeable. Okay, if there's a hazard that's never happened with anything related to your food, so if salmonella is not a risk for you, you don't have to develop a hazard analysis that accounts for the chance of salmonella with your food. But if there's any history, any known or reasonable foreseeable hazard associated with your food or your type of facility, that's what you want to identify. And then you follow up further on in the plan with what it takes to stop that hazard from happening, essentially. The evaluation again, it determines if the hazards are really likely to occur, and they're looking at everything. So you see the list there, the formulation of the food, the facility and the equipment, raw materials and ingredients, transportation and the like. So transportation, for example, is it a refrigerated product? Are there temperature control records to show that the product was transported in a manner that kept the temperature where it needed to be? Sometimes raw material is being delivered in a truck that's opened in the back. What's falling into that truck? Are there animals getting into it? Things like that. What's being done to address that sort of thing later, if that's something that happens. So all of these are factors that go into hazard evaluation, and all of them need to be addressed in your preventive control plan. Now, you notice I said preventive control plan. It's not HACCP. All right, HACCP is most of preventive controls, but it's not everything. So I could be the world's foremost expert on HACCP, but if I don't have some sort of education or knowledge of what preventive controls is and how it differs, I am not really qualified to develop a preventive control plan. Now, I'm going to pick it up pretty quickly, I'm sure. But in your discussions with folks, you want to move away from the phrase HACCP and move into preventive controls. And we'll cover some of that as we go through. And here are some of the controls that are required. Allergens are a biggie, by the way. So again, the primary members of my group are importers, and what I tell my folks is that, okay, if I'm going to buy from you in Canada, I need to know every ingredient that's in your facility, because I'm responsible for the potential for allergen cross contact. So I have to know what other ingredients are in there. Now, I don't have to know how you're using them or anything like that. I just have to know that if they're there, that measures are being taken to make sure that there isn't cross-contact issues. So allergen is a big one. Another big one here is a recall plan. That is something new with FSMA. It requires everybody to have recall plans in place. So if you don't have one, if you're not using a lot code system, and I know some small manufacturers don't, the problem is if something occurs and a recall is needed, then you got to bring everything back. Where if you have a recall plan and you're able to just bring back and you're able to trace back to just the items that were impacted, you're going to be better off. Again, monitoring, again, you need to be, you have procedures that says what you're going to do to monitor that the hazards are being addressed and how frequently it is being done. Corrective actions, again, sometimes you know them up front. Okay, we have this salmonella risk. It's going to happen no matter what we do. If it does happen, here's the corrective action we take. We immediately stop production. We go back, we clean again, we do this. Whatever, you have all that in place. In verification, again, you're validating and reviewing, making sure everything's being done, you're calibrating machines, things like that. And it's all part of that circle that I showed earlier on. And again, here's the recall plan. And here's basically the components of it. But again, there's two things about it. A, you need one, because if you are inspected by FDA, and I'll tell you what an FDA inspection of a foreign facility looks like, they're going to ask you for that. Your importer should be asking you for that, and the importer needs to develop one as well. Most of it is going to be almost copied and pasted from what you did, at least until it got to them. So that is something that that's new. Recall plans, that is a new requirement. One thing people always have to remember is that FSMA, and it'll be the same, I'm sure, with the Canadian law and in other countries, it's not a one-time deal. It's an everyday, people have to be given dedicated time to do all of this stuff. And I'm going to show you in a little bit some of the steps that have to be taken. But there's two time frames for reanalysis. All right. Basically, you're reanalyzing on an ongoing basis because you're always reviewing test results. What you want to do is be aware of issues that your competitors might be having. If you're producing the same product and the competitor has an issue, you want to make sure that can't happen to you. That's part of a reanalysis. And you're going to do that the second you hear of it. Even if it's a similar product, if you hear of an issue, you want to go and take steps to, hey, let's make sure this can't happen with ours. The risks are very similar. Let's make sure it can't happen here. So you want to do that, and hopefully, let's say you've gone through the initial process, and it's October 1st, 2020. On October 1st of 2023, you have to go through a reanalysis. Now, it should be fairly quick in that time, even if you've been doing stuff as you go along, because if you haven't had any issues, the reanalysis isn't a heavy lift because it's something you've been doing on an ongoing basis. Here are required records. That's important, obviously, for the producers in the session. You have to have a food safety plan, and then records for the document, the monitoring of the preventive controls. So again, think back to that circle. corrective actions, and verification. And then we're going to get into the records that document the training for the qualified individual. Before I get into the definition of a qualified individual and all that, excuse me. Okay, so I wanted to, first talk about some of the inspection results that we're seeing. Okay, first one, food safety plans. So do the foreign exporters, that's what this is in this case, is results of FDA inspections of foreign facilities. Do they even have a food safety plan? Well, you can see the numbers are 96, 91, an average of 93 when you do the running total. So 93% of the facilities at least have a food safety plan. If you don't have one, and we'll talk about FDA inspections a little bit, but that's one of the very first things an inspector is going to come in to ask for. So it's not going to get you off to a very good start if you don't have a food safety plan, because quite frankly, you would be one of the luckier producers out there if you have no food safety plan, yet you've had no issues. So you want to make sure you have the plan, and then does that plan have hazard analysis and controls in place? And I put the asterisks down on the bottom here because this is obviously only referring to the facilities that had plans in place, because obviously if there's no plan in place, there's nowhere where hazard analysis controls are put in place. So then we move on to preventive control plans. Again, this is for those with plans. Are they adequate? So 98% have been adequate so far. That's pretty good. Validations, monitoring, it's falling short a little bit of in that 6% that don't have the sufficient. They're probably doing some, they're just not doing enough. And same with corrective actions and verification. Corrective actions, from what I've heard, they just don't have any in the plan, although there are some that exist among others in the industry. So that's where they're falling short. So some other issues, allergen controls. So 89% have them, and sanitation controls 83. So those are two areas FDA is starting to focus more on. Allergens, for example, more than 1/3, it's about 40% of, well, actually, of the actual recalls themselves. I saw a statistic, I think it was 54.7% of recalls here in the United States are because of undeclared allergens. Yet only 3.6% of the population has a food allergen. So, and I'm not in any way minimizing the severity of food safety of a food allergen. It's just that if they're declared, it's not necessarily a hazard if the consumer is notified properly. It's when it's undeclared that is indeed a very serious hazard, and that's why recalls are needed. And that's why, again, as an importer here in the United States, if I'm buying from you, I'm going to say I need to know what other ingredients are in your facility so that I can know that there needs to be or doesn't need to be allergen cross-contact procedures put in place. So again, where are suppliers falling short in supply chain management program in place? So in your facilities, it doesn't start when it gets to you, right? You're using ingredients or produce and the like. You have to have a supply chain management program in place. Even if you are importing some of those ingredients from somewhere else, then the product is manufactured in your facility, shipped to the United States. You want to make sure the regulation requires that and have documentation that the ingredients you're using are safe and that they meet the FSMA regulations for producing safe food. So that is an issue where some are falling short. So here's the results of domestic inspections. NAI is no action needed. VAI is voluntary action, and OAI is mandatory action by FDA. So you can see it's been pretty good. For example, 2018, 4,169, no action needed. About 1,300 voluntary action. So that might be something where FDA investigator says, you're missing this component. The voluntary action is you do what the investigator has said you're lacking, and you document it, you've done it, and then you're probably going to be done. You'll be okay, and they won't come back for a while. So that happened in about 1,300 cases, and then nearly 50 or so. The violations were serious enough, or the facility didn't make the requested corrections, and then FDA stepped in. Now you can see in 2019, it was about 5,000 inspections. 2,300 or so had some issues, and 74 had some serious issues. 2020, like everything else, the numbers are going to be skewed. So this was prior to March. As of March, FDA pretty much stopped all inspections, domestic, foreign, all of them. In fact, if you were inspected between March and today, for example, there was probably a pretty serious food safety or perceived food safety risk with your products, because the pandemic basically put a stop to all of the inspections from FDA. They are ramping them up again. They're still doing mostly mission critical is the phrase they use, but they're looking to get back in facilities to see what's going on. So the results of foreign inspections, and you can see the numbers are less, but 834 where everything was good, 278 where voluntary action was needed. Only 4 where somebody had to take care of something, pretty quickly. In 2020, they had done 1,782 early on. So in fiscal year 2020, you could see that they had gone up, and this will be, for the most part, a fairly typical year in terms of the number of foreign inspections. So you're looking at roughly anywhere from, it'll range anywhere from probably 2,000 to 3,000. So whereas your chances of it being inspected aren't that great, there are other ways that you're being checked on. And you always have to remember the commercial reality of things in terms of, if I'm buying from you, I need all of this information. I want this information. You ought to know that I'm bringing in safe food. So don't let the relatively low risk of being inspected by FDA give you any sense of not having to take things seriously. Okay, so on the importer side of things, there's where the importers are falling a little bit short. Now you can see what the numbers are here. This is all totally new ground for importers. The regulation that's out there, the Foreign Supplier Verification Programs rule, basically makes, for the first time ever, somebody in the United States explicitly responsible for the safety of the food that's being brought in. And there are some new there's some new requirements that a lot of importers didn't have. For example, I have to have a document if I'm an importer that says, here are my procedures for approving each and every one of my foreign suppliers. Well, in the past, that really wasn't done, particularly in small companies, and the food import business has a lot of small companies. So this is just something that didn't exist. And that's why there's a lot more to the light blue in this, because the investigators from FDA are finding that the industry isn't where it needs to be yet. But you'll see that These are not major issues though. So it was 281 that were, everything was fine, 514 where it wasn't. And in 2019, it was 303, 559. So somewhat similar percentages. And in 2020, 217 where everything was good, 285 where the importer was lacking some things. So if your importers are starting to ask you for more information and that sort of thing, this is why FDA is coming to them, and they don't have everything that they need. Some of it they may get from you. I'm going to show you some of that in a little bit. Just a quick note again too. The FSVP rule, Foreign Supply Verification Programs rule, again, makes somebody in the United States responsible for the safety of food. So if I'm buying from, 3 of you on the call, for example, or all of you, and I might get a notice from FDA, okay, we're going to come about this entry, and this entry that came in, maybe 2-3 months prior. And it's probably from 3 of you if you're on the call, and you're my whole list of suppliers. So FDA is going to want to see that for those particular entries, I can document that I brought in food that I know was safe. And the reason it's by making someone in the US responsible, it's a lot easier for the FDA, and just as it would be in any other country, for our government to take action against somebody in the United States than in a foreign facility. So that's the genesis of the rule, really, make someone in the United States responsible for the safety of the food. But if you look at the inspection, what happens when they come and inspect me, and they're looking at 3 entries, they're sort of de facto doing an inspection of 3 foreign facilities. So it's increasing the agency's inspection foothold in a much more time-efficient manner. And what'll happen if there's an issue with something I'm bringing from you, and that investigator has concerns about the safety of the food, well, they're going to be looking at me a lot more closely, but your chances of inspection just went up. So that's why it'll be frustrating, I'm sure, at times, but there's going to be different kind of communications, a lot more requests of you, and you have to get used to that. So some current and future issues that do or will cause problems. And this is sometimes what we'll do, we'll bring in somebody from FDA and customs and everywhere else, and they'll speak at one of our meetings. And typically I'll say, can you give me the top 5 things that you're seeing that are causing delays? And so these are among the ones right now that are somewhat current. Incorrect information provided to the broker. The customs brokers that do the entry filings, it's on a line item basis, and sometimes an entry has 100 line items. It depends on a number of factors. It used to be 11 or so data elements per line item. Well, now there's 40-ish, closer to 50, actually. So that's a lot of information. When this regulation, FSMA, came out, the brokers, I think, assumed, too many of them assumed that they knew all of the ins and outs of the regulation. And remember, there's 7 major rules, so they didn't know. I think by now they're catching up, but it is something that the importers, I always recommend that they have at least an annual discussion with the broker, getting their feel for how familiar they are, what kind of issues they're running into with entries in general related to correct entries and the like. You don't want to put the broker in a position to assume what it is that needs to be entered. For example, if there's only room to list 1 FSVP importer, I'm going to show you what the difference is between that and importer records very soon. There's only room to list 1. Sometimes more than 1 entity meets that definition. Well, if they list me, for example, as the FSVP importer for an entry, That is where FDA is going if it conducts an inspection related to that entry. Well, it's not a very good way to start off an inspection if they get here and I'm like, I don't know, I'm not supposed to be FSVP importer. I have no idea what this is about. So there's got to be a really heightened level of communication between all of the parties, but then explicit instructions given to brokers. Sometimes FDA tells the importer, okay, we're going to sample this entry. The next step is the entry has to confirm where the product is, because sometimes it's been moved off of the dock already. Well, if they don't do that, FDA can't come and inspect it. So I've had people call me over the years, I've been waiting 10 days. The FDA hasn't inspected my product yet, sampled it. Well, did you tell them where it is? Well, no. Well, how do they know? So that's a real reason and an easy one to fix. And then the facility is not registered. So we're going to get into that very quickly here. A facility, whether it's based in the United States or anywhere else, that produces food that's going to be sold here in the United States has to register with the Food and Drug Administration. The only difference for a foreign facility is that it has to name someone here in the United States to be the agent. It's basically a communications conduit. So FDA needs to reach out to the facility. They may go through the agent instead, because similar to taking action against a foreign entity, it's easier for FDA to get a hold of me as a facility registration agent in a lot of cases than it is to go to someone in another country. So that's the primary reason the agent area was set up. It's not recommended, however, that you as a foreign producer use your customer as an agent because it works well in two scenarios. One, if you're the parent company and it's a U.S. office, or the U.S. customer is your only, and it's going to be your only customer for a 2-year registration cycle. Because if there's even more than one, let's say Xavier and I were both your customers and he is the agent, and something comes up where FDA wants to reach out related to one of my entries. Well, I personally would not be that comfortable with him being involved. He's a busy guy. Now he's got to take time out from what he's doing to address something that impacts me. So there's a risk in there of getting in trouble in terms of it's just a cumbersome way to handle things. And then also, if Xavier is the agent and it's something related to me, and a recall, for example, the bill is going to the U.S. agent for that facility. So now he's got a bill sitting on his desk for something that has no relation to him whatsoever. So that's why using customers is not a good idea, except if they're your only customer. A lot of third-party entities do it. My contact information will be at the end. If you fall into a situation needing that, I can help you. Our association does it for free for all of our foreign members, but I'm happy to recommend others as well. The renewals, the registrations have to be renewed every 2 years. In fact, just opened up today, the new renewal cycle. So sometime between now and December 31st, all registrations have to be renewed. This is on a facility by facility basis. So if you have two, there'll be registration specific for both. It's actually one of the easier components of US compliance. So don't worry too much about it. We'll get into one other new wrinkle that came in just a little bit. I wanted to cover some of the more frequent questions I get. So what is a PCQI and do I need one? PCQI is a preventive control qualified individual. So that's the person in a producing facility or people. I always recommend you have at least two no matter even if it's a very small facility, because if you have one and that person leaves the company or is out on family leave or something, who's your PCQI? You don't have one. So this person, it's a combination of education, training, work experience, one or all three, that gives them the knowledge required to do things such as preparing a food safety plan, overseeing it, reviewing it, creating records, that sort of thing. So all of your facilities are going to need a PCQI. As I mentioned before, it's not HACCP. So, again, I could have been with Pillsbury and NASA, because that's where HACCP started for the space program here in the US in the 60s. So I could be the world's foremost expert on HACCP, but if I don't have any training in preventive controls, I can't be a PCQI. So good options here for PCQI. The best option is through the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance. So if you just Google that, it'll take you to their website. The reason I steer you that way is because it's a public-private partnership funded by FDA. It's not an FDA document when you take these tests, these courses rather, but FDA has seen and is comfortable with every single word that's in there and how it's used. So it's the best way to get training. You get a certificate when you get done. You have to be able to back that up, obviously, with knowledge, but you have a certificate. It's offered in many languages and in many forms. It's offered in person all around the world. It's offered in hybrid format, and it's been offered online for quite some time now, too. Quick note, there is no set price that has to be charged. So you'll see a wide range of pricing. I just recommend that you do a little vetting, make sure that you're comfortable with the qualifications of the speaker. But what I tell my folks here, the importer end of things, make a strong recommendation that your suppliers have at least 2 people take this course. It's a long course, though. It's 20 hours of coursework, so it's not something you'll do just like in an hour that we have this morning. It's a commitment, but I've seen people take the course who have years and years of experience in the industry, and they were taking as many notes as some that were new to the trade. So I strongly recommend that PCQI training. So what does your customer need from you? Well, here's a list, basically. And what I did here is I underlined where I, as an importer, probably going to come back to you to ask for help. The FSVP regulation, the one pertaining to imports, says that there has to be a hazard analysis. It doesn't say that I have to do one. It says there has to be one. So what's happening in the overwhelming majority of instances is I, as the importer, reach out to my supplier for the supplier's hazard analysis. Now I have to review it and become familiar with it. And if I can't really review it and understand it, then I need to get some help. But I have to have that. I have to evaluate each and every foreign supplier before I start buying from them, or as it's coming into play here. My existing suppliers, I have to go through a formal process to approve them. I'm probably going to ask for some more help on the risk posed by the food again, because that's actually part of the hazard analysis, right? So I have to have procedures for approving foreign suppliers. So let's say had been fortunate enough, and we were all together in April, and I'm with a U.S. importer, and I'm walking the floor, stop by your booth. I'm really impressed. I've even worked with you in the past when you were with a different firm. Well, I can't buy from you on the spot because I've got to go through an approval process to approve being able to purchase goods from you. So that might be a new wrinkle you see when you do some trade shows. The approval process shouldn't take too long. So I'm not thinking it's going to be a huge one, but it is something that will keep someone from being able to sign a contract perhaps right on the spot. for each entity I'm buying from, I have to have an overall, here are my procedures for approving, and then one specific, this is how we approve them and when and where. Again, procedures for ensure use of only approved foreign suppliers. That did not exist before. And that's a huge one in terms of where importers are falling short. Determination of verification activities and frequency. Again, as an importer, and there's wording within several of the regulations that clearly spell out, they don't expect me to have the same level of scientific knowledge of the product as you in a producing facility. So I can rely on you to help me determine the verification activities and frequency. I can even cut and paste something you put together, but I have to produce a document on my letterhead. And it is an area where importers are falling short. Performance of the verification activities, so it might be sampling and testing before it gets shipped here. Again, we work together to determine what that verification activity is, how frequently it is. You can supply me with the test results, for example. Discussion of any needed corrective actions. Again, you're going to know the science more than I am as a producer. So I can discuss with you corrective actions because you're going to be in a better position. I still have to create the document, though, if corrective actions are needed. And then they also have to have documentations of any kind of reevaluations that they do, whether it's on an ongoing basis or in that 3-year period. So when your importers are asking for this is the type of things, and included in here obviously would be audit information and testing. So that would come under the verification activities. So your importers are going to need information on third-party audits and the like, and on any testing that's going on related to their product. If it's a refrigerated product, mentioned before, temperature control records are going to be needed. FDA is asking importers for that. And they're also requesting that when they go into a facility to do an inspection. Is the importer record the same thing as an FSVP importer? No. All right, and we have a handful of members in Montreal and Toronto and elsewhere in Canada who are the importer of record for many, many entries into the United States. They can never be the FSVP importer because the FSVP importer is designed as the person in the US. Remember, the government wanted to be able to take action against somebody here in the US, make somebody here responsible for food safety. Whereas the Canadian companies can serve as the importer of record for all of that business they do here in the US, they can't, unless they open up a US office, be the FSVP importer. If that's the case, they have to get an FSVP agent. Couple things here before I go into a little more detail on the agent. There could be more than one entity. So, I'm buying from you, and I'm the importer here. So we have a purchase order in place, and I've already sold the goods to a customer of mine. Well, now 2 of us meet the definition. So it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we agree who's going to be the FSVP importer and that those instructions are given to the broker correctly. So, because again, it's the FSVP importer who's ever listed, that's where FDA is going first. That's whose door they're knocking on. The FSVP importer, as a note on the bottom says, it is different. The FSVP agent is different than the FDA facility registration agent. Okay, so I mentioned the association. We serve as a facility registration agent for hundreds of companies, close to 1,000, I believe. We will never be an FSVP agent because if we agree to that, we are agreeing to be responsible for the safety of the food. And quite frankly, we don't have the manpower here, but we also don't have the scientific knowledge of the product to know the risk associated with all of these items and how they're handled and all that. So it's a big difference in the definition. And the importer of record and FSVP, that's another key definition that people need to understand that are different. Do you need a DUNS number? The answer changed from yesterday to today. In the last renewal period, U.S. importers needed a DUNS number. But prior to that, it wasn't needed. As of today, with the registration renewals that are going to take place, a foreign entity needs a DUNS number as well. So I'll give you some quick details on them. DUNS is Dun and Bradstreet. They've been around since George Washington timeframe, long time. And what it's doing is it's unique to each facility. So if you have two facilities, you're going to need two DUNS numbers. And the information that's being provided is it's basically the address and contact information, and then you get a DUNS number. As I said, it's different per facility. That's why they needed to come up with something else in terms of not just one facility number or what have you. So they moved towards DUNS numbers. There are two links there that you can use to get them. They're free, or you can pay for one. You will get the one you pay for quicker, but I recommend, if you don't have a DUNS number yet and you are shipping product here, get those facilities the DUNS numbers as soon as you can. Quick note about registration, as I mentioned, it just opened up today, goes to December 31st. Your existing registration is perfectly valid through the end of the year. I'm not telling you to register December 31st, but if you were to do that, it has the same impact as registering today. So don't panic if like for example, we don't even start the 1,000 or so that we do. We don't even start trying to do them until about October 10th or 15th. Because every time we go through this cycle, there are some hiccups. And we let others deal with that. We kind of monitor things. We hear what's going on, check with FDA and that sort of thing, look for anything in the news. When we're comfortable, we do a couple. And as long as things get going, then we start moving through. But in the meantime, if you don't have a DUNS number, start that process, because I imagine that will take several days at least to get a DUNS number. Are Canadian exports to the U.S. exempt from FSMA? So obviously that's a question I get a lot when I do SIAL Canada. Maybe. Finished goods, yes, there's a systems recognition agreement between the United States and Canada where the U.S. has recognized that Canada's food safety system is equal to, we're the U.S. We'll never admit that it might be better, but we'll say it's equal to. And so finished goods from Canada are going to be exempt from FSVP and from FSMA in general, which means if I'm buying from you, what I get from you on an annual basis is a letter stating that you are still under the good graces of the CFIA and that you are producing food that meets all regulations. As opposed to all of the other documents that I need from the producer of the same product from a country where there is no systems recognition agreement. And the only other two countries are New Zealand and Australia. So it is a benefit for Canadian producers. It does not, however, pertain to ingredients, or the best example I could think of is the cute little jar of honey that you see in a retail pack. That is exempt if it comes in a drum, even if all I'm doing is putting it into other cute bears, it's not. So you have that. Does FDA approve or certify suppliers? I get that question a lot, and that's why I wanted to make sure that you're aware that no, FDA does not. So I chuckle sometimes. I'll go to a trade show and I'll see something in somebody's booth that says, FDA approved, FDA certified. It doesn't exist. So if somebody asks or demands from you that it's got to be FDA certified, well, it doesn't exist, so you can't do that. Or if you see a competitor doing it, you may want to let your potential buyers know that a bit of a red flag if they're promoting something that doesn't exist. Technically there is something where a program exists like that, just that nobody's done it yet. So I know that there are no FDA certified suppliers, that sort of thing out there. Are any foods exempt from FSVP/FSMA? There are products that are covered either by other regulations and the like. So seafood and juice, they have HACCP regulations. They've had them since the late 90s or right around 2000, and those weren't changed. They're still subject to HACCP. Alcoholic beverages, different arm within FDA handles all that stuff. Something not intended for sale or distribution. So if you happen to produce something in Canada and you're shipping it down to Mexico, and it's not going to be sold here, it doesn't have to be, all this documentation isn't needed for the US folks. And the others are USDA regulated type of items. And, that was a brief look at some of the stuff that I'm seeing going on. Real quickly on the inspections, because I often get questions on that. We expect that they'll rely a lot on importer inspections right now, because all that can be done is a paper inspection, and they can just request those documents from me as an importer, for example. Over time, hopefully things get back to where we can be in person again, and then FDA, among others, will start going out and perhaps doing some more physical inspections. So for the moment, I wouldn't expect that you'll be inspected by FDA, but you certainly don't want to slack off. Your importers are still going to need all the documentation, because their chances of being inspected have actually risen because of code. So with that, I'll turn the floor over, see if there's any questions, and if not, my contact information's on there. People can reach out to me whenever.
Thank you, Bob. That was a very detailed presentation, and I guess that everyone on the audience should understand every step to go in the US. But I have a question for you from a participant saying, if for any reason we got out of the ADA compliance list, can we get it back rapidly if we make the necessary adjustments, or we have to wait a period to be able to re-export the product?
That's a very good question. Yeah, you're going to have a couple of chances before FDA would even say that it's not comfortable allowing your product in. Typically what happens is FDA will go, and if it's a major issue, they'll say, okay, we want to see what you're going to do to correct this, and give us those details, let's say within 14 days, 30 days, whatever. And you'll provide them. If they're good, everything is good. If they need a little more work, they'll give you some more time. The only time we're really at risk of not being allowed to bring it in is if you don't pay attention to that and don't provide FDA with what it wants. Then in order to come back in, you are going to have to prove, and it's going to be a fairly detailed process, that we are producing safe food, and you're also going to have to resell all of your customers here too, so that's an issue. So I don't think it's going to be a problem for someone who's taking the initiative to be on a training session like this, because I know you're going to listen and do what FDA requests. So I wouldn't be too concerned on that end.
Okay, I have another question for you. Do you have a template for a prevention control plan?
No, and I know my attorneys won't let me do a template of any sort because things change a little bit. What's recognized as good science today could change a little bit by next year. And if you're using my template next year and there's an issue that isn't addressed, it creates liability for me. So that's the way our lawyers explain it to us, that they won't but I do believe there are some folks out there who have put some out. So a Google search may come across some, but I do know some consultants who will, it's proprietary, but once you start working with them, they'll obviously share their template with you.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. I don't see any other questions for the moment. So thank you for this presentation. I just would like to say to our audience that this video could be seen to our YouTube channel within 1 hour and a half, 2 hours, and also in the replay conferences section in the menu of the SIAL Canada virtual show. You could keep on talking with Bob on his expert virtual booth in the SIAL Expertise Hall as well, if you need to. And thank you again. Thank you all for your support. Have a good virtual visit. Bye.